Chapter 15, Part A. How to Handle Resistance and Solve Problems. One can stand still in a flowing stream, but not in the world of men. Japanese proverb. Earlier, you learned how to model, to elicit decisive patterns of human actions that produce desirable results, to direct your own actions to take control of your life. The underlying idea was that you didn't need to choose your behavior by trial and error. You could become a sovereign by learning the most effective way to run your own brain. When you deal with others, a certain amount of trial and error is inevitable. You can't direct the behavior of others with the speed, certainty, and effectiveness with which you control your own results. But a key to personal success is learning how to speed up that process. You can do it by developing rapport, by understanding metaprograms, by learning how to calibrate others so you can deal with them on their terms. This chapter is about taking the trial and error that's inherent in human interaction and increasing the pace of discovery by learning to handle resistance and solve problems. If there was a key word in the first half of the book, it was modeling. Modeling excellence is crucial to learning to rapidly create the results you desire. If there's a key word for the second half of this book, it's flexibility, the one thing effective communicators have in common. They learn how to calibrate someone and then keep changing their own behavior, verbal or nonverbal, until they create what they want. The only way to communicate well is to begin with a sense of humility and a willingness to change. You can't communicate by force of will. You can't bludgeon someone into understanding your point of view. You can only communicate by constant, resourceful, attentive flexibility. Often, flexibility doesn't come naturally. Many of us follow the same patterns with numbing regularity. Some of us are so sure we're right about something, we assume mere forceful repetition will get us through. There's a combination of ego and inertia at work. Many times, it's easiest to do exactly what we've done before, but the easiest is often the worst thing to do. In this chapter, we're going to look at ways to change directions, break patterns, redirect communication, and profit from confusion. The mystic poet William Blake once wrote, "The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breeds reptiles of the mind. The man who never alters his communication patterns finds himself in the same dangerous ooze." We learned earlier that in any system, the machine with the greatest number of options, the most flexibility, will have the greatest effect. It's the same with people. The key to life is opening up as many avenues as possible, trying as many doors, using as many different approaches as it takes to solve a problem. If you run on one program, work from one strategy, you'll be about as effective as a car that runs in one gear. I once watched a friend try to convince a desk clerk at a hotel to let her keep her room for several hours after checkout time. Her husband had been injured in a skiing accident, and she wanted him to be able to rest until transportation was arranged. The clerk politely and persistently kept giving her all the excellent reasons why it simply wasn't possible. My friend listened respectfully, and then kept coming up with even more compelling counter reasons. I watched her run the gamut from charm and feminine persuasion to reason and logic. Without ever being haughty or bringing outside pressure to bear, she simply hung in there, pursuing her desired outcome. Finally, the clerk gave her a rueful smile and said, "Madam, I think you're winning." How did she get what she wanted? Because she was flexible enough to keep producing new behavior and new maneuvers until the clerk was unwilling to oppose her any longer. Most of us think of settling a dispute as something akin to verbal boxing. You pound through your arguments until you get what you want. Much more elegant and effective models are the Oriental martial arts like Aikido and Tai Chi. There, the goal is not to overcome force, but to redirect it. Not to meet force with force, but to align yourself with the force directed at you and guide it in a new direction. That's precisely what my friend did, and it's what the best communicators do. Remember that there is no such thing as resistance. There are only inflexible communicators who push at the wrong time and in the wrong direction. Like an Aikido master, a good communicator, instead of opposing someone's views, is flexible and resourceful enough to sense the creation of resistance, find points of agreement, align himself with them, and then redirect communication in a way he wants to go. The best soldier does not attack. The superior fighter succeeds without violence. The greatest conqueror wins without a struggle. The most successful manager leads without dictating. This is called intelligent non-aggressiveness. This is called mastery of men. Lao Tzu, Tao Te King. It's important for us to remember that certain words and phrases create resistance and problems. Great leaders and communicators realize this and pay close attention to the words they use and the effect they have. In his personal autobiography, Benjamin Franklin describes his strategy for communicating his opinions and yet maintaining rapport. "I developed the habit of expressing myself in terms of modest diffidence, never using, when I advanced anything that may possibly be disputed, the words certainly, undoubtedly, or any other that give the air of positiveness to an opinion, but rather say, I conceive or apprehend a thing to be so and so. It appears to me, or I should not think it, so or so, for such and such reasons, or I imagine it to be so, or it is so, if I am not mistaken." This habit, I believe, has been of great advantage to me when I have had occasion to inculcate my opinion and persuade men into measures that I have been, time to time, engaged in promoting. Old Ben Franklin knew how to persuade by being certain not to create any resistance to his proposals through the use of words that trigger negative responses. There are other words. Let me give you the example of one ever-present three-letter word, but. Used unconsciously and automatically, It can be one of the most destructive words in our language. If someone says, "That's true, but," what is he saying? He's saying it's not true, or it's irrelevant. The word but has negated everything said before it. How do you feel if someone says to you that they agree with you, but? What if you simply substitute the word and instead? What if you say, "That's true, and here's something else that's also true," or "That's an interesting idea, and here's another way to think about it." In both cases, you start with agreement. Instead of creating resistance, you've created an avenue of redirection. Remember, there are no resistant people, only inflexible communicators. Just as there are phrases and words that automatically trigger feelings or states of resistance, there are also ways to communicate that keep people involved and open. For example, what would happen if you had a communication tool you could use to communicate exactly how you felt about an issue without compromising your integrity in any way, and yet you never had to disagree with the person either? Would that be a fairly powerful tool? Well, here it is. It's called the agreement frame. It consists of 3 phrases you can use in any communication to respect the person you're communicating with, maintain rapport with him, share with him what you feel is true, and yet never resist his opinion in any way. Without resistance, there is no conflict. Here are the 3 phrases: I appreciate and, I respect and, I agree and. In each case, you're doing 3 things. You're building rapport by entering the other person's world and acknowledging his communication, rather than ignoring or denigrating it with words like but or however. You're creating a frame of agreement that bonds you together, and you're opening the door to redirecting something without creating resistance. Let me give you an example. Someone says to you, "You're absolutely wrong about something." If you say, "No, I'm not wrong," just as strongly, are you going to remain in rapport? No. There will be a conflict and there will be resistance. Instead, say to that person, "I respect the intensity of your feelings about this, and I think if you were to hear my side of it, you might feel differently." Notice, you don't have to agree with the content of the person's communication. You can always appreciate, respect, or agree with someone's feeling about something. You can appreciate his feeling because if you were in the same physiology, if you had the same perception, you would feel the same way. You can also appreciate someone else's intent. For example, many times 2 people on opposite sides of an issue don't appreciate each other's points of view, so they don't even hear each other. But if you use the agreement frame, you will find yourself listening more intently to what the other person is saying and discovering new ways to appreciate people as a result. Let's assume you're having a discussion with someone on the nuclear issue. He is for a buildup of nuclear arms, while you are for a nuclear freeze. The 2 of you might see yourselves as rivals, yet you may have the same intent: more security for your families and yourselves, and a world with peace. So if the other person says, "The only way to take care of this nuclear problem is to nuke the Russians," rather than arguing with him, you could enter his world and say, "I really appreciate your commitment and desire to create security for our children, and I think there may be a more effective way than nuking the Russians that will accomplish this." What about the possibility of, when you communicate in this way, the other person feels respected, he feels heard, and he has no fight. There is no disagreement, yet new possibilities are also simultaneously introduced. This formula can be used with anyone. No matter what the other person says, you can find something to appreciate, respect, and agree with. You're impossible to fight because you won't fight. One who is too insistent on his own views finds few to agree with him. Lao Tzu, Tao Te King. Chapter 15, Part B. In my seminars, I do a simple little experiment that provides most people with memorable results. I have 2 people take different sides of a question and debate it without ever using the word but, and without ever trying to denigrate the other's point of view. It's something akin to verbal aikido. People find this a liberating experience. They learn more because they're able to appreciate the other person's point of view rather than feeling they have to destroy it. They can argue without getting belligerent or upset. They can make new distinctions, and they can reach points of agreement. Try the same thing with someone. Pick a topic you can take opposite sides on and argue it precisely the way I described above, as a game of finding commonality and then leading in the direction you want to go. I don't mean you should sell out your beliefs. I don't want you to be an intellectual jellyfish, but you'll find you can reach your outcome more effectively by gently aligning and then leading, rather than by pushing violently. And you'll be able to develop a richer, more balanced point of view by being open to another perspective. Most of us look at discussion as a win-lose game. We're right and the other guy's wrong. One side has a monopoly on truth, and the other resides in utter darkness. I've found time and again I learn more and get where I want to go much more quickly by finding an agreement frame. Another worthwhile exercise is to argue for something you don't believe. You'll surprise yourself by coming up with new perspectives. The best salesmen, the best communicators, know it's very hard to persuade someone to do something he doesn't want to do. It's very easy to get him to do what he does want to do. By creating an agreement frame, by leading him naturally rather than through conflict, you do the latter, not the former. The key to effective communication is to frame things so that a person is doing what he wants to do, not what you want him to do. It's very hard to overcome resistance. It's much easier to avoid it by building on agreement and rapport. This is one way to turn resistance into assistance. One way to solve problems is to redefine them. to find a way to agree rather than to disagree. Another way is to break their patterns. We've all found ourselves in stuck states in which we recycle our own mental dirty dishwater. It's like a record stuck in a scratched groove, playing the same tired refrain over and over again. The way to get the record unstuck is to give the needle a nudge or pick it up and put it somewhere else. The way to change a stuck state is the same. You need to interrupt the pattern, the tired old refrain, and start anew. I'm always amused at what happens when I conduct a therapy session at my home in California. It's on a beautiful piece of property overlooking the ocean, and when people arrive, the surroundings tend to put them in a positive state. I like to watch them from the turret above the house. I can see them drive up to the house, get out of the car, look around in obvious excitement, and proceed to the front door. It's apparent that everything they see is putting them in an alive, positive state. So what happens? They come upstairs, and we talk a little. It's all very pleasant and positive. And then I'll ask, well, okay, what brings you here? Immediately, I can see their shoulders slump, their facial muscles droop, their breathing become more shallow, their voice take on a tone of self-pity as they begin their tale of woe and decide to enter their troubled state. The best way to deal with that pattern is to show how easy it is to break. What I usually do is say very forcefully, almost in an angry or upset manner, "Excuse me, we haven't started yet." What happens? Immediately they say, "Oh, I'm sorry," sit straight up, resume normal breathing, posture, and facial expressions, and go back to feeling fine. The message comes through loud and clear. They already know how to be in a good state. They also know how to choose to be in a bad one. They have all the tools for changing their physiology, changing their internal representations, and changing their state in order to change behavior right on the spot. How fast can they do it? In an instant. I've found that confusion is one of the greatest ways to interrupt patterns. People fall into patterns because they don't know how to do anything else. They might mope around and become depressed because they think they'll evoke sensitive, caring questions about what's troubling them. It's their way of getting attention and using their resources in the best way they know how to change their state. If you knew someone like that, how would you react? Well, you could do the expected. You could sit down and begin a long, sensitive, anguished discussion. That might make the person feel a little better, but it also reinforces the pattern. It tells the person that if he mopes around, he'll get all the attention he wants. What if you did something else? What if you began tickling him, or ignoring him, or barking like a dog in his face? You'll find that this person won't know how to respond to you, and out of his confusion or laughter will emerge a new pattern of how to perceive his experience. Now clearly, there are times when we all need someone to talk to, when we need a friend. There are real instances of grief and pain that require a caring, sensitive ear. But I'm talking about patterns and stuck states, repeated behavioral sequences that are self-perpetuating and destructive. The more you reinforce them, the more harm you do. The real aim is to show people they can change these patterns, that they can change behaviors. If you believe that you're the ball on the tether, waiting for someone to hit it, that's how you'll behave. If you believe that you're in control, that you can change your patterns, you'll be able to. The trouble is that many times our culture tells us otherwise. It says we don't control our behaviors, we don't control our states, we don't control our emotions. Most of us have adopted a therapeutic model that says we're at the mercy of everything from childhood traumas to raging hormones. So the lesson to learn is that patterns can be interrupted and changed in an instant. When Richard Bandler and John Grinder were doing private therapies, they were known as masters of the pattern interrupt. Bandler tells one story about visiting a mental institution and dealing with a man who insisted he was Jesus Christ, not metaphorically, not in spirit, but in the flesh. One day, Bandler walked in to meet this man. "Are you Jesus?" he said. "Yes, my son," the man replied. Bandler said, "I'll be back in a minute." This left the man a little bit confused. Within 3 or 4 minutes, Bandler came back, holding a measuring tape. Asking the man to hold out his arms, Bandler measured the length of his arms and his height from head to toe. After that, Bandler left. The man claiming to be Christ became a little concerned. A little while later, Bandler came back with a hammer, some large spiked nails, and a long set of boards. He began to pound them into the form of a cross. The man asked, "What are you doing?" As Richard put the last nails in the cross, he asked, "Are you Jesus?" Again the man said, "Yes, my son." Bandler said, "Then you know why I'm here." Somehow, the man suddenly recalled who he really was. His old pattern didn't seem like such a good idea. "I'm not Jesus. I'm not Jesus," the man started yelling. Case closed. A more positive pattern interrupt is an anti-smoking campaign that began a few years ago. It suggested that anytime someone you love reaches for a cigarette, give him/her a kiss instead. In the first place, it interrupts the automatic pattern of reaching for a cigarette. At the same time, it produces a new experience that can cast doubts on the wisdom of the old one. Pattern interrupts are also valuable in business. One executive used them to get his factory workers to change the way they looked at their work. When he first took over, he went to the plant where they were building his personal model of the company's product. But when it came off the line, instead of taking it, he chose another model that was made for the general public. It wouldn't even start. He flew into a rage and made it clear he wanted every one of the plant's products built as if it were for his personal use. He said he might show up at any time to check out the quality of any product. This news spread like wildfire. and the experience interrupted the pattern of poor workmanship and caused many people to re-examine what they were doing. A master of rapport, the executive was able to pull this off without causing the workers to resent him because he appealed to their pride. Pattern interrupts can be particularly useful in politics. There was a good example recently in Louisiana. Kevin Riley, a state legislator there, lobbied throughout the legislative session for more money for the state's colleges and universities. All his efforts turned out to be in vain. No more money was appropriated. As he stomped out of the state capitol, a reporter asked him his thoughts. He launched into a tirade, declaring Louisiana was nothing but a banana republic. He said, "What we ought to do is declare bankruptcy, secede from the Union, and file for foreign aid. We lead in all the good stuff, illiteracy, unwed mothers, and we're last in education." At first, his remarks set off a storm of criticism because they went so far beyond the usual circumspect level of political discourse. But soon he became something of a hero. He probably did more to change the state's thinking about funding education by that one tirade than through all his ardent politicking. You can use pattern interrupts in daily life. We've all been in arguments that take on a life of their own. The original reason behind the dispute may have long since been forgotten, but we rage on, getting madder and madder, more and more intent on winning, on proving our point. Arguments like this can be the most destructive thing a relationship can face. When they're over, you may think, how in the world did that get so far out of hand? But while the argument is still going on, you have no perspective whatsoever. Think of situations you have been in lately where you or others were stuck. What pattern interrupts could you have used? Take a moment now to create 5 pattern interrupts you could use in the future and think of situations where they would be useful. Respond intelligently, even to unintelligent treatment. Lao Tzu, Tao Te King. What if you had a pattern interrupt set up in advance, like an early warning alarm, to short-circuit an argument before it got out of hand? I've found humor is one of the best pattern interrupts. It's hard to be angry when you're laughing. My wife, Becky, and I have one in place that we use all the time. Have you ever seen the Saturday Night Live skit based on the phrase, "I hate it when that happens"? It's pretty hilarious. The actors tell each other about awful things they do to themselves, like rubbing sandpaper across their lips and then pouring rubbing alcohol on them, or grinding a carrot scraper up their nose and then sticking a menthol cough drop there, and then they say, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I hate it when that happens." So Becky and I have an agreement that when one of us feels an argument is becoming destructive, that partner can say, "I hate it when that happens," and the other has to let go. It forces us to break the negative state we're in by thinking of something that makes us laugh, and it also reminds us that we do hate it when we do that. It's about as smart to get in a vicious argument with a person you love as it is to rub sandpaper across your lips and then pour alcohol on them. Everything that enlarges the sphere of human powers, that shows man he can do what he thought he could not do, is valuable. Ben Jonson. There are 2 main ideas in this chapter, and they both go against the grain of what many of us have been taught. The first is that you can persuade better through agreement than through conquest. We live in a society that revels in competition, that likes to make clear distinctions between winners and losers, as if every interaction must have both. Remember the cigarette ads from a few years back that carried the message, "I'd rather fight than switch"? They featured a person proudly sporting a black eye as proof that he stuck to his guns, no matter what. But everything I know about communication tells me the competition model is very limited. I've already talked about the magic of rapport and how essential it is to personal power. If you see someone as a competitor, someone to be vanquished, you're starting out with the exact opposite framework. Everything I know about communication tells me to build from agreement, not from conflict, to learn to align and lead, rather than to try and overcome resistance. This is easier said than done. However, through conscious and consistent awareness, we can change our patterns of communication. The second idea is that our behavior patterns aren't indelibly carved into our brain. If we repeatedly do something that limits us, we're not suffering from some abstruse mental ailment. We're just running a terrible pattern over and over again. It may be a way we relate to others or a way we think. The solution is simply to interrupt the pattern, stop what you're doing, and try something new. We're not robots wired into barely remembered personal traumas. If we do something we don't like, all we have to do is recognize it and change it. What does the Bible say? We shall all be changed in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. We will be if we want to be. In both cases, the common ground is the idea of flexibility. If you have trouble putting together a puzzle, you won't get anywhere by trying the same solution time and time again. You'll solve it by being flexible enough to change, to adapt, to experiment, to try something new. The more flexible you are, the more options you create, the more doors you can open, and the more successful you will be. In the next chapter, we'll look at another crucial tool to